Sorry, I'm like, okay. Anyway, okay, what did you just say?
I brought my own mug because I'm wearing lipstick today. I didn't want to, like, get...
Oh, whatever, man.
Well, so sweaty.
Yeah,
so nice.
It's so nice. Something about what you said. This is brain fog.
Today, I've got the one and only Hannah Reeves with me on Conversations That Matter. Cups and Conversations That Matter. So, introducing my cup. So, tell me about your cup.
Okay, my cup was bought for me by my mother-in-law, and just as a gift. And I don't know, I love gifts.
It's huge.
I know it. Well, I like it because it's giant.
Well, today we're talking about Hashimotos. So those of you who don't know, we're going to learn a lot about that. Hashimotos is recent to me. It's kind of a new development for me. Upon getting pregnant, it came with a lot of cool new surprises, and Hashimotos was one of those things. So Hannah has been instrumental and so helpful to me in this journey, and so I really appreciate it. And so a lot of people ask her a lot of questions, and so I really appreciate every insight, every experience, trial and error with this or that or whatever. So everyone has their own experiences on what works for them and their diagnoses. So Hannah's going to kind of talk to us about Hashimoto's and autoimmune and as it pertains to that.
Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease. It's autoimmune thyroiditis. So you can have low thyroid, but you can also have the autoimmune version of that. And so that is what Hashimoto's is. And so it's where your immune system attacks your thyroid cells and your body's cells. So your immune system attacks your own body.
So why would the immune system attack the thyroid cells?
Because it thinks your thyroid cells are an invader.
Okay.
So it's like if you have a virus or a bacteria, your immune system will send antibodies to attack those things so that you're not sick anymore. But in Hashimoto's, your body thinks that your thyroid and your thyroid cells are an invader. So a virus or an illness. And so your immune system sends antibodies to attack.
I know for me it was like my doctor saw swelling first in my thyroid and then, check the levels. So for a regular person, do you know like kind of what the antibody count is kind of supposed to be? Zero. Okay.
Yes, it's supposed to be none.
Okay. And so for people with Hashimoto's, generally, where is their antibody count?
I don't know, but I think mine was in like the 600s.
Okay, mine was in the 7,000s.
Yeah, and so that's like insane. That's like, when they did that, I had been on thyroid medicine for years.
Oh, already.
Okay. And so when they tested me and my antibodies were still high, that's when I was diagnosed. But my Hashimoto's was triggered by pregnancy.
Okay.
As well. And so with my first child, she's almost 8. And so my doctors told me, oh, you're hypothyroid, after I'd had the baby.
So it was after giving birth.
So giving birth, and then my doctor was like, well, let's test your thyroid levels. And he was like, well, you're hypothyroid. But hey, a lot of times that'll go away, because a lot of times after you give birth, you can have low thyroid.
Okay.
And so
that's common.
It's very common, yes. And so, but for a small percentage of people, it does not go away. And it's most likely Hashimoto's. So it's like that was triggered or turned on by the trauma of giving birth.
Which is interesting because, like, I haven't even given birth yet. And so, like, the day I went to the doctor to figure out if I was pregnant or not, that's when they diagnosed me. They're like, number 1, you are pregnant, and number 2, you have Hashimoto's.
Yeah. So, and I think that they test a lot of pregnant people.
Yeah.
Because it's really important to get it under control while you're pregnant. because if you have extremely low thyroid levels, like low thyroid hormone, it can actually like affect the development of the baby.
Yeah, so your first pregnancy, you did not have the diagnosis of Hashimoto's.
Correct.
Then you gave birth.
Mm-hmm.
That's when Hashimoto's diagnosis came into play.
Well, that's when they told me I was hypothyroid.
Okay.
So then 4 years later, it took me like 4 years to get diagnosed with Hashimoto's.
Oh, wow.
Because
Okay.
I was on thyroid meds and still feeling awful.
Okay.
And so, oh my gosh, my cat.
Intro the cat. We got a visitor. We got a cameo.
Oh my gosh. But I was still feeling really terrible. And so I went to just my general practitioner, and she was like, well, let's test you for mono. And let's test you for, like, you know, Hashimoto's and all those things. And so Hashimoto's is the one that came out.
So for you, feeling terrible, what does that mean?
A lot of inflammation and, like, I feel like swelling.
Okay.
Okay. Swollen lymph nodes, and it will kind of feel like I have the flu. Like I'll have body aches. A lot of flu-like symptoms.
Interesting.
And at that time, I also was having a lot of joint pain.
Okay.
And joint, like even like numbness or tingling, like, and just problems with joint weakness. Well, so I tried everything.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You
So
know?
what's the tipping point?
Yeah.
Like,
Like I started eating gluten-free.
Okay.
And that helped me feel a lot better. So, because in the beginning of this journey, like I was not functional at all. Like I could hardly get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
I could, if I made it to the couch, awesome. Like it was really, really hard. And so I just didn't have energy. And I think like the brain fog was so bad.
Brain fog. Okay, so explain brain fog to people who don't know what
brain fog. It almost feels like your brain is working slowly.
Okay.
It's like, to me, when your computer is slow. When your computer is slow and you're like, I'm clicking on this thing, why isn't it opening? So it's very much like that. So it can cause memory issues, and it can just cause like cognitive processing issues.
Okay.
So for me, it was like, oh yeah, what was it? What was it that I know that I was going to say this. What was it? And it's just slow. It's like loading, you know? And so for me, that's a lot of what brain fog is like. So I was feeling really bad, and I started doing like a gluten-free diet, and I felt a lot better. And so I thought, well, this is managing it. Mm-hmm. But then I started like having what I would call like a flare up, which is just a really like an increase in symptoms, increase in severity of symptoms. So I started having flare ups again, and I was like, what is going on?
How long would those last?
I mean, one was really bad, and I think it was triggered by stress, the stress of moving.
Okay.
And it lasted for a week. I mean, I was in bed for a week.
Okay.
So,
Dang.
But like, that's not always how they are.
Mm-hmm.
Especially now, I feel like I've gotten things like managed kind of a lot better. And so, but at that point I thought, well, I'll just go through the list of common triggers, like food triggers and allergens, and just eliminate. Like just start eliminating stuff and see if it helps me.
So the list of triggers, like where did you find this list?
Oh, girl, like, I don't know, Pinterest, blogs, like Google searches, like books, so I don't know, everywhere, yeah.
So your self-experiment stage or whatever was just like, okay, trial and error, I'm going to do this myself and see what works for me specifically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and so the next thing that I cut out was dairy. And so, because a lot of times if you have an issue with gluten, you will also have an issue with dairy.
Interesting. Okay.
And so, well, and also I kind of had a sneaking suspicion that I may have developed celiac. And there is a link between Hashimoto's and celiac.
Okay.
If you develop Hashimoto's, there is a greater likelihood that you will also develop celiac.
That's what I've heard. Okay.
So anyway, so I cut out dairy, and dairy is not good for you if you are celiac.
Okay.
So a lot of people just think don't eat gluten, but dairy can be like a real issue. So it lasted a while, and then it didn't. And I was like, okay, I think this is an autoimmune disease.
Wow.
Like there's something going on here. It's not just hypothyroid.
To where it wasn't like, okay, well, if I just do this and this, then I will feel better.
Yes.
So it was like, okay, well, I am doing this and this consistently. Why do I still feel like
correct?
this?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that is when I went to just my general practitioner and said, I feel awful all the time. Like, what's wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
And they ran a bunch of tests.
Okay.
And that's when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's.
So the test that they were running before for your thyroid, did it include antibody?
No.
Okay.
Generally, doctors will just run like a TSH.
Okay.
Or they will run a panel, which includes like T3, T4, TSH. That might be it.
Mm-hmm.
None of those are the tests that tell you if you have antibodies in your system. So I would recommend anyone who thinks, well, I feel like this, like I might have this issue,
Mm-hmm.
ask your doctor.
Yeah, so see, that's what is interesting to me. So after I got the diagnosis, I called my mom. Of course, I'm freaking out because I've never heard, like,
Right.
what's a thyroid? I have no idea. And so, and she was like, oh, I was actually diagnosed with hypothyroidism. And I said, okay, well, what was your antibody count? And she was like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
So she didn't know.
Right.
But my doctor immediately ran blood work for TSH, and she told me mine was normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said, but your antibody count is 6,700. So that's an indicator of Hashimoto's. We're going to try, a few different things and kind of see what works for you specifically.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because a lot of times doctors will test your TSH, and it can be normal even if you have Hashimoto's.
That's what was so strange. So like my TSH, I think it was either 3.3 or 3.4,
Mm-hmm.
which is normal.
It's kind of on the high end.
Yeah, kind of. But she was like, "Well, you're pregnant, so let's try to get that down as much as we can." And at that point, obviously, I'd never heard of anything thyroid, so they didn't have me on any medication.
Right.
So, getting on medication to get the TSH down, but then I was told that antibody count can never go down. It will always be high, and really there's nothing that you can do about it. So in your experiences, like, what would you advise to someone who is who's just been diagnosed with Hashimoto's? They might be freaking out, they might be fine. I don't know. I just assume that everybody's like me and they're freaking out. So what would you, advice that you would give to people who have been diagnosed with Hashimoto's for the first time?
Okay. First,
this is cause for a lot of, self-evaluation. So I'd love to hear from you guys. Is there anything that you feel like has been helpful from Hannah or from this conversation? I'd love to continue conversation, so this won't be the last time that you hear from Hannah. And then hopefully getting more people in on this conversation as we have a community of people who are conquering through, living their best life. That's it. Yeah. That's it. All right. What up, players? Hope you enjoyed that video. Go ahead and like and subscribe so that you can stay up to date when a new video drops.